Hello, hello. So this is episode 6, I believe, of Awakening the Witches series, and it felt important to do one of the episodes with me speaking about this journey, as it's one that I've been on for quite a long time, many lifetimes, in fact. And yeah, something that I felt that I needed to speak about, and I've been very open to the idea that this series would be a 6 series episode or maybe 9. So let's see if somebody else steps in. But that it felt important to speak about my journey and share that because the witch history and rewriting it to her story has been so very important to me. But I will say and share that this morning I was like, right, I'm going to write lots of notes and research the laws and research this, that, and the other. And then I went, oh, I could do her story. And her story to me is just going within and tapping in to spirit and everything around us, what some call the collective consciousness. I call spirits, soul, senses, all that is source, and just getting the answers from there and speaking to you from the heart about what I know about witches, what I understand about my soul story, and why I felt that I had to write Awaken and awaken myself in the process. So, yeah, let's go in. And the first thing that's drawing my eye immediately is to karma. And I'm about to run a series on karma and really talk about what that is and how important that is to understand it, to clear it, how we collect it, but also how we use it. And I think that's what writing a play about witches really brought up for me, about the idea of karma and past lives and how we lived before and how we accrue karma and what we come back to say and to talk about and to learn. But also that there's an extra dimension of karma, that we actually carry karma in for the collective. So what I mean by that is we bring these forward when we reach a certain level of spiritual awareness to go, I must speak about this. And that's for a lot of creators writing stories and telling history from a new perspective, or mediums that channel messages and prophecies. Because actually, if we don't know what has gone before us, then we are just there to make the same mistakes again and again and again. And one thing that I think is so important, and why I've ended up wanting to write a trilogy of plays, is that our history keeps getting stopped at certain timeline points. So, for example, if we go back to ancient Egypt, all the books were burnt in the libraries and taken out, so that knowledge was like taken away and started again in the Library of Alexandria, I believe. And then it happens again and again, where one thing that's really interesting to know on the witches' history itself is that a lot of the papers of the records of witches that were accused or people that were going to trial, a lot of the records were burnt and disappeared and destroyed. Which I think is a very interesting thing to know factually, because it means that we don't have the right history, we don't have the right records, because lots of things were destroyed. And this is a repetition of what happens time and time again, that history is written as his story, somebody's story, and it's always the story of the people in power. I mean, it goes so far back, to use an example of King James, who rewrote the Bible and rewrote, he was fascinated by demonology. And he rewrote, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. So he wrote the words, okay, witches are not allowed to live. That's pretty big. And it was his changing of history. So the words of the Bible existed in one form and then he changed them. So you've constantly got people in power changing history and then teaching that to the next generation and the next generation. But that's not truth. That's just one person's take on something. I believe we really need to move away from that. So as I got up this morning and I was like, okay, I'm going to write my knowledge from research, from the internet, and then I'm going to half tap into what's true to me. I just got encouraged by spirit, by my own gnosis, my knowledge, my inner soul wisdom, to leave that aside. The research period on my play is done. And I speak to many writers here that you get quite addictive to the research. You're like, I have to know this, I have to know this, I have to know all the answers. Same as an actor, same as I think any business or passion that you have. You're like, you just want to soak up all the learnings and the knowledge and the teachings, and you take an amazing amount of courses so that you have this kind of credential that you know what you're talking about. But what I've found is the real wisdom every time comes from within. Like the stuff that my soul knew and remembered about witches happened way before the research did, way before I even knew that I was a witch. I just walked into a Reiki healing class and I just saw my past life being hung as a witch, and I just knew it and I could see it. Like it's, when you see visions, when you're going through like working as a healer, it's like everything is kind of a crystal clear image, but there's an emotional state to it that makes it much more real than if you were just imagining something. Just to try and explain that a little bit better. And I kind of had no awareness of witches at the time. So I was like, why am I being shown this strong image of me hanging on a tree? And I just knew it was because you were a witch. But when you look up a lot of stuff about witch history and witch killings, a lot of the stuff out there is about sort of older or vulnerable, mainly women. A lot of people were just, what they say was misaccused of being witches, and they were the ones that got sort of died horrible deaths, which I'll go into the darker side of all of that shortly. But they never really addressed the people that were actual witches. It was much harder to find, and the more I kind of looked into it, and I was still in the very researchy stage here, I found out that Cunning Folk existed. And then suddenly things made more sense to me, because Cunning Folk is sort of I believe it's an English term, but it was a name for the phrase of people that were working around the 17th century. I mean, obviously, healers and witches and everything go way older than this, but it was what was happening at that time when the witch craze went huge. And laws were basically brought in around the same time, to say that to be a witch was a crime punishable by death, which was a new law, and basically that wiped out a hell of a lot of people. It was a time of, I want to say, madness in our history, but I also believe it was just a time that kind of reiterates itself again and again and again, and that is why I think the books get burnt and the knowledge gets stolen, so that we're never learning from the same old patterns that we're doing again and again. And that is persecuting certain people and pushing them down and making and injecting absolute fear in society. And of this time, it was fear of the devil and fear of casting like bad juju on people, and making so people were accused as witch because, say, their crops were dying or their animals were dropping dead, and they were saying people were hexing them and cursing them. And this might sound more ridiculous to people of these days, but I think actually to go a level deeper is to look into what spells are, and spells are just something that you can't see cast over you. And I think it's important to realise that there's spells everywhere in our society, whether you realise that you're playing with spells or not. Spells are negative words that you're chucking at people and you're causing them really bad energy. Spells are a form of mind control, and mind control exists. I mean, if you look deeper into the CIA, they admitted to using mind control as a way of programming the military, as a way of, I mean, you go a level deeper and you can see all the dark history in marketing, how it was used as a program to keep women smaller after the war and wanting to stay at home. I mean, we even see it now, how the media programs us that women should be this way, or they program us to turn against each other, to go, well, you believe in this and you believe in this, so you should hate each other. So we all spend all our time as I believe, still perpetuating the same old problems in our society, which is turning us against each other and not seeing that the actual dark force held over us is the power over, often brought in by kings, even queens, brought in by governments or corporations or people that are, these days more interested in money than they are about livelihood and the wealth of people. It's, the more you get up the higher the ladder and the more power you hold, the more easy it is to be corrupted by certain things, and what I believe is selling your soul. So I guess in conclusion, I kind of want to say that I believe that the witch history is still so relevant today. I mean, I'm not someone that doesn't believe in magic and spells and spirit and all of those things. And I think that's the very tricky element that was taken out of the witch history, that now we're meant to look back on history and go, oh my God, weren't they naive to think that the devil existed? Weren't they naive to think that people could put spells over anyone? And I feel, aren't you naive to think that that's not possible? And don't get me wrong, that hasn't been an easy reclamation to come to. I mean, I might be very overtly spiritual now, but I've gone on a very fast track, immense journey over the past sort of 5 to 6 years. That's not to say I haven't always been spiritually inclined and very witchy in my nature. And by that, I mean that I've kind of been able to sense spirits around me since my whole life. I believe I've lived many lives as a witch, a medium, a healer, a spiritual person. I mean, I'm an old soul, so it's in my bones to have this kind of knowing. And I came into the world with that saying that we're often brought up, and you only live once. I have never bought that. It felt wrong to me when anyone said that. I was always like, no, you don't. I mean, that's just insanity. To me, that we could think that way because we don't know the answers. So even if it's something that you go, we don't know the answers, to have a statement that just says we definitely do this just has to raises a question. Really, how do we know that? And the reason that I know that I haven't only lived once is because I've seen time and time again of how I've lived, and I've tapped into those timelines, and I've seen spirits and heard them and witnessed things that I was brought up not to believe in. So even though my logical mind wanted to question everything, and I go back as far to say when things started to happen to me when I retrained as an actress, maybe 7 years ago now. Wow. That things were happening to me that I couldn't quite get my head around. So I went to work with a shamanic healer to get somebody to understand what I was going through. And I remember going into her office and looking at her and going, are you actually open about the stuff that you speak about, or do you just speak about it behind closed doors to clients that you work with? And she said, oh, I just pick my rooms and know who I can speak to. And I feel like we're actually beyond that now, that we have to give people the gift of being true to who we really are, no matter where we are. Or certainly that's what I'm being called to do, especially with writing plays about spiritual matters. And if I'm wanting to bring this whole spiritual era into theatre, into the mainstream, then I can't keep it or myself small by not speaking about what I really believe in, but also what I've witnessed time and time again, through working with clients on a soul level, through working with spirit in my life, and through working as a witch to awaken. And yeah, what most wants to come through about the play. So I never introduced myself. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit and say that I'm an actress and a writer and a healer and a 5D theatre maker. And what that means is my passion and my love is to bring the supernatural into theatre so that people can understand it and make it accessible. My belief is that we're all spirit, we're all souls, unless we choose to sell our souls away. And I believe that we've lived through a time where we were deliberately taught not to be in touch with our own innate nature, our own souls, because that's where our wisdom and our power lies. And that very particular for the witch craze that went on is a time of both religion and enlightenment going on. So religion where the church would say, we have access to a higher power, but you, the people, don't. And then when enlightenment was coming in and it was like science, and they were like, we've got the answers, science is everything. Once again, we're putting the power into other. Science has the answers. You don't. You end. So you're finite. So we look for the answers for science to save us and prolong our lives and, fix us. But we don't go within and ask for the answers here and the healing within our own bodies and the powerful vehicles that we are. So we're getting taught the same dangerous myth time and time again. And I always, think it's really important to understand words. So witch has such powerful connotations in it, such powerful connotations, because it's been programmed to associate it with evil and darkness and haggardness and women and cast out women. And so it's very difficult to step into the word witch without all of that shaming and disrespect of what that actually is. But I will go as far to say that the whole witch history, you can't ignore that there were two sides, that there were a side of people saying, no, there's people working with the devil here and they're doing very dark, wicked things. And I believe that happens still. That's still happening today. There are people doing very, very dark things in the name of not love, not soul consciousness, but have sold themselves to the devil or the dark. We see it time again. You only have to look at the example of Jeffrey Epstein, or who was not alone in his acts, and in Hollywood and the Me Too movement and the disgusting things that came out of that. Those people had sold their souls to the devil. Those people were not they were abusing their positions of power. And this is still happening very much today. It's not being uncovered as much as it should at all, in so many fields. And I do believe in the next year or two, more and more things are going to come out of the closet. We're going to have an even bigger an awakening as a society. And we're going to change into this newer world, because we're going to go, none of these systems worked for us. The very simple word I share is that I think it's important to know the meaning of words, is something like government. And in Latin, that means mind control. So it's always important to look at the words and break apart the words and then think, okay, if a government was set up to control your mind, are they serving you, the people, or are they just trying to control you? And we've seen this so recently with laws in court coming in to control women's bodies. Now, my feeling has always been that we are sovereign, free beings that deserve and have the right to talk about what we wish from the heart, to make choices of what's best for us and our body, and to always tap into something more, something higher consciousness, something spiritual, and to always have the freedom to talk about that, even though there was times when it was told you were not allowed to access spirit, and that's in our law system. So yeah, there's a lot there, a lot. And I think that's about reclaiming who we are as people, but for me also as a witch, reclamation, to be like, no, I claim my right to my body, to my spirit, and to my soul. And that is the most powerful thing that you can do. And I think if anyone takes anything away from the play that I've written that I really want to get out into the world in a bigger way, it's that let's have a look at the name witch. And in my play, I give you an example of someone that works with spirits, because I believe that's the kind of witch I am, and the kind of witch I was. So I felt that that hadn't really been talked about before, because this was someone that was actually doing something that was banned by law. And why was it banned by law, and why did that have such ripple effects? And I think it's important to know of the ripple effects it is, because the Witchcraft Act turned into the Fraudulent Mediums Act, and it was a constant way of going, you cannot work with spirit because this is wrong, this is fraudulent. I don't know whether people know that the Vagrant Act was stopping gypsies from tarot reading, and that was in place for a really long time. It's 2008 when these laws started to be repealed. I mean, the Witchcraft Act was 1952, but that's quite. It wasn't about killing witches, but they were still able to go be imprisoned for it. And don't get me wrong, the Witchcraft Acts were actually about people that were practicing mediumship or sorcery or astrology or, reading cards. So everything that a lot of healers and witches and priestesses, light workers, oracles, anyone that you want to work with in the healing community, a lot of their practices have been illegal for a long time. So recently, even into our history. And I think that should never be disregarded, because the reclamation and the ownership of the word witch and the lifestyle has been a very hard to come by thing. And actually, there's always a want for people to repress it, and even to look at the witch history and then take out all the gifts that some cunning folk were certainly using, that witches were using, the medicine that was all laid out in there, and the teachings to say, okay, let's work with spirit to work with the good of all and the good of the land and all things like that. If we disregard all that from our history and only look at it from one angle, that it was all misaccused people that didn't have any power or any kind of different level of consciousness, then we're not looking at the whole of history, and we're certainly not taking into account the laws which were actually banning things for working with certain, working with the devil. Now, I say all that without saying there are witches out there that do work with the devil. There are Luciferian cults, there are people that are spiritual that aren't necessarily working for the light. Of course there is. As much as you can work with angels and spirits of good, the world is made up of many things. So there's demons and dark forces and evil energies out there just as much as there is light. But it's whether the right people went down for it. And I think my belief is no, they didn't. There was a consciousness, there always is a consciousness, that dark forces are at play everywhere. We've all, you've all been to places where you've just got that sense of that thing's off, that person's not quite right. I mean, there are murderers and psychopaths and in all walks of life, including people that run very big corporations and are very high up and always have been. And, who's to say whether the kings and queens throughout our history were the most humane people? There might have been many of them that weren't, good soul-based leaders and teachers and people, the same as in our governments. It's a question that we really need to ask ourselves of people in positions of power and people that are not in positions of power. I mean, we need to come together as people of forces of good and for respect for love and humanity and love of the human spirit, and come together and rule from that place, and join together in communities of support. rather than trust in that external power. And I think that's what the whole witch history has really brought up for me to look at, both the dark and the light side of our history, but also the power that was taken out of the hands of the people and put elsewhere into places that it never should have been. And I think we're in a time now where we really need to call that power back to us. Wow, that took me on a place I didn't know I was going to go into today. I was like, yeah, tell me what I need to talk about witches. And it was like, let's talk about the whole of the situation that we're in today. And then I want to make sure that I touch upon, before I close up this subject today, a few witches, mediums, oracles, as I call them, that have very much fed into my work. My work is reclaiming witches in our history and also clearing out names. And a few of those are Joan Peterson, Helen Duncan and Cecil Husk, who I would really like to name, and I will continue to name witches, healers and mediums as I go along this process, because I feel like it's very important to name these people and share these people. But I'd like to start with Joan Peterson, who is a cunning woman who I name in my play. And I talk about her real life story. She was a practicing cunning woman, so she worked with many people as a healer. She did bewitchments, which meant taking bad hexes off people. She'd help cure people with medicines and herbs. And she was a very respected woman that lived in East London back in the 17th century. And I think it's often not very well known of the history of witches and cunning folk in London, in the very streets where I live. And I know that it's a lot bigger than, and a lot, it's quite hard to find out this information. And I know that it's hidden in places, and I know that it's coming out to be retold, because I believe there was a massive cunning folk movement in London, and there was many people here that were practicing and working with spirits, and there was a lot of people that were working with learned magic as well, and they're more known of within the occult because they were more in positions of power. But there was also a lot of people working on the ground, the everyday cunning folk, which they were called, which a lot of people had a lot of respect for. But this cunning woman was actually hanged for being a witch. She was accused of bewitching someone, and that person that she accused of being bewitching didn't even come to court to testify against her. It was actually set up against her because she wouldn't tell tattle on another woman. Basically, someone had this guy had married this woman who was like full of wealth, and and then she died, but she passed on their money to the niece instead of him. And basically he went to Joan Peterson and said, will you say she put a spell on her to get the money? And Joan Peterson said, no, I will not tell tattle on another woman. And in the end, they turned her business and her workings against her, and then had her up for being a witch, which was a very easy thing to do if it was men in high standing places wanting to stand against you and make you do something that you didn't want to do. You could easily get deemed a witch and easily go to death for it, because the laws at the time were like, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. So the minute your name had been cast out like that, you were in a very vulnerable position. And women couldn't speak at their own trials to defend themselves either, which I think is a very important thing to know. So you were put in such a vulnerable position. But beyond that, why Joan Peterson's very important for me to talk about is she wouldn't let them break her spirit, and she went to her death misaccused, and she's never really had her justice for being an absolute honourable woman, and not turning against someone to save her life. So I believe she deserves a plaque up in her name in East London, and I hope that one day we'll get there. But also I wanted to raise awareness that that's how easily you could lose your business as a cunning woman. The minute someone said that you were doing things, bad things, they stripped away your power from you. And that leads me on to Helen Duncan, who was the last woman tried under the Witchcraft Act. And she was a medium, and a very, very talented and well-known medium. You can read up much more. Her family have done a website dedicated to her, which is a beautiful gift into showing really how deep her talents laid, and how much she sort of served her community. She worked as a medium through the war to help people with loved ones that they'd lost, which many mediums do. The whole ethos in mediumship is to give people faith that spirits go on. Your loved ones are always there. And yes, I am sure that there are people that maybe have abused mediumship and given fake messages, but a very, very few might have used it as a gains to earn money or something, and been tricksters. I've met a lot of mediums, and their work is phenomenal, and their work is so heart-led to help people to feel like, to know that their spirit is there speaking to them when they can't hear it themselves, when they haven't got access to it themselves. I believe we all have access. It's just whether we choose to train and hone this skill that's been murdered out of us, to put it bluntly, and it's been stripped from us from so many centuries of regulations and laws and misunderstanding of what it truly is to be a spirit walking the earth with the soul. That doesn't go away, and that's still in the people that have passed on. Yeah, the body might not be, but the person is still there wanting to communicate with you. And so she was this wonderful woman that worked with that, but she actually uncovered a ship that had gone down that hadn't been reported yet, and she actually spoke to the son, whose mother was there, and he came through, and she didn't even know that her son had died. She knew he was away, and actually somebody from the military was there, an army officer, and he called into his base, and they said, yes, the ship's gone down. So she basically got in trouble for reporting this information that was covered information, and then got pulled up and had, like, basically she was told that she couldn't work as a medium anymore, because she was uncovering truth. Basically, it is the nuts and bolts of it. And she had her mediumship used against her and disrespected, because she could emit ectoplasm out of her mouth, which is like spirit matter. And they raided her once when she was doing that, and she got 3rd-degree burns, which is, something worth looking into. And that is inevitably what killed her in the end, after being sent down to jail for what she was doing. But she was also cast as a fraudulent medium, and it makes me want to question when somebody's pulled out facts. And the police do often work with mediums to uncover cases and things like that. This is a whole part of people have been working with mediums for years and years and years, maybe in astrology or in different ways, the whole way down our centuries. They've been worked with, so they also need to be put back and honoured and put in place in our history as something that exists. And it might not be something that everybody agrees with or understands or believes in themselves, but certainly there should be a place for them and an honouring of them, because all I know is that it's not, it's a craft, and it's something that needs to be worked at and learn, and it's an absolute, beyond that, it's a devotion to walk that path of mediumship, and I have so much respect for it. And to complete this chat today, I'd like to talk about my ancestor Cecil Husk, who was a very famous medium at the time. I believe he's like my great-grandfather one side removed through my great auntie, but I only found out about him when somebody in our family was chasing up the family tree, And then we realised that we were related, and my auntie said to me, "You do realise you're related to Cecil Husk, who was a really great medium?" And I looked him up, and all I found on Wikipedia was the fraudulent medium Cecil Husk. And I thought, that doesn't fit right. And then I found more about him in the spiritualist community, and about how many people that he helped, and that actually he had more and more pressure on his shoulders to create spectacle and entertain and to do bigger things. But really, he was bringing through amazing messages. And there's a woman that worked with him time and time again, that she wrote amazing things about him, and all the things that he managed to do, and all the proof that he brought through, and all the hope that he gave people. So much so that when he died in his 80 years, I think he went blind and was in poverty near the end. It was actually his clients that took care of him in his final days, out of an honouring of the good work that he'd done as a medium. And I'm just listening in to see if he wants to bring anything more. Yeah, and to say that I feel in my play and in my work, honouring mediums and witches is just a part of honouring my ancestors, honouring myself and who I truly am, and honouring the absolutely persecuted spiritual people in our history that has happened time and time again, that needs to stop here, that needs to stop happening, that indigenous folk or people that work with the land or people that work with souls and spirits are often thought of as backwards in some way, or they're doubted, or they're not understood. But really, I believe it's all who we are right at the truthful core, that we have this greater knowing, that we have these supernatural abilities that we can just tap into and use, that we have this amount of power within us. And actually, if we lived aligned with our own power and our own light source, and which is basically our soul, that we wouldn't be in these terrible times in our history, that we would feel better, for starters, feel more connected, and be more tapped into the things that we're meant to be doing on this earth, and living in a more free, less controlled state. And I think that's my act of spiritual revolution, witch reclamation, and honouring, to live in that way, to write stories, to animate this voice, and to be true to everything I am and everything I'm capable of on a soul level, because the world really needs it now. We need to be birthing this new reality into being. It's why I brought 5D theatre as a business forward as I was writing my plays. I was like, okay, this is a whole movement. This is a spiritual revolution. I'm not just writing one story. I'm wanting to change the way things are in the world. And 5D consciousness is just the acknowledgement that we're more than this 3D reality of what we can see, touch, and what we're told, that we're souls, that we can work with spirits, that we all have supernatural senses. And I have a love for theatre and storytelling, an absolute passion for it. That's how I will manifest and birth these realities into being. And that's why I wanted to do it through theatre, but bringing new consciousness into theatre, a higher consciousness, and a new way of experiencing the world, so that if somebody saw one of my stories, they could go, oh, that's made me look at witches in a different light, or that's okay, oh, I have that sixth sense in me, and why am I not using that? Or actually, even greater, the aim is to heal something and bring some deeper knowing alive in everybody that watches these stories and goes, oh yeah, I'm bigger than what I've been told, I'm more than what I thought I could be. And that is the telling of her story, my story. So yeah, I think, yeah, I feel very complete in that. But what feels, yeah, I feel like I'm going to drop in the healing meditation and an energy alignment into the link of this, because it feels like with all of that bringing up of witch history and soul activation, I think the best place to be with that is there was a meditation that I do daily at the moment, which is energy clearing, which I'll drop in the link, which is a great way to start your day and work your day and finish your day. But also there was a witch's meditation that was brought up for anyone that felt triggered or awakened or felt an interest in the witch history, or that they lived as a healer or as a witch themselves and wanted to kind of bring that soul knowing up in them and understand it. So I will copy in a meditation I did, especially for those spiritual folks and healers and mediums and witches. And finally, to say that I will be doing a closing circle for Awaken at the end next Monday, just as this play online is closing up for its next incarnation. One of those. It's next venture. So it's going to come offline until it can go live into places, spaces, festivals, just where it needs to go, and go to its next level of evolution. So I'll be holding a healing circle and a bit of a soul retrieval, for this is the healing work that I do one-to-one with people, but I very much want to at some point bring right into theatres and work in a really new, extended level of what's possible in theatre, that we can tell stories, but we can heal our communities much like we've always done, around the fire, supporting each other, nourishing each other, and coming together as a community. So yes, they are the offerings, which I will drop into the chat. But yeah, most of all, I'm going to end with a gratitude. Thank you to anyone watching this, sharing this journey with me. I've had so much support and encouragement and beautiful, beautiful words shared about people and their experience from watching the play. I have been encouraged and ignited to go on my journey with so many people sharing such honest, raw things about themselves. I don't think I'd be able to do this work if I hadn't done so much work as a healer and seen how much truth and how much was coming up in all of us to be healed around witch history, but also around reclaiming our spiritual gifts. It's been part of my path, but part of so many others. So yeah, thank you to all the people I've worked with that have shared space within Circle, for all the amazing creatives who've given me so much of their passion and souls and inspiration along the way. And yeah, sending lots of love to the witches, many of them who have never been honoured enough for what they went through, and how they were cast out in their societies and even shamed within families, who have been working with me to bring these stories alight, and who I will honour in every which way I can, because it's so much more than a play. It's a movement. Thank you.